Hello and welcome to the second episode of my 2023 Rugby World Cup preview series. We continue the series by looking at the three-time champions, New Zealand. Despite a shaky 2022 where they lost a test series at home to Ireland, they are close to securing a fourth rugby championship in a row, but still seem to be going in under the radar. Joining me to preview the All Blacks tournament is Kiwi rugby writer and another debutant on the channel, Jamie Wall. So thanks very much for joining us, Jamie.
It's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Well, I'll start all these podcasts the same way. So I'll ask yourself as well, Jamie, where's your excitement for the tournament as of now, over a month and a half out?
Yeah, it's getting pretty palpable at the moment. It's been an interesting last few years for the All Blacks. And when I say interesting, I mean not that great, which is not how they usually are going into a World Cup. And I think that now that the season has started playing and the All Blacks have a couple of good wins under their belt, that people are really starting to kind of look forward to the tournament and say, like, okay, if a few things go our way, then the All Blacks might have a decent shot at taking it back. So, the confidence is still very much there from All Black fans. But for me, I think as someone who's going over to it, I'm really looking forward to it. I think that having a tournament in France is something that's really unique, and I just can't wait to get there, because this is the most interesting World Cup that there's ever been. I think if I can take my All Black hat off, I think that any number of teams can win it, and the way that the draw's been structured has been heavily criticised, but at the same time, it's meant that we've been having discussions like this for the last 2 years. So, the more talk and the more conjecture around these sort of things, the better. Because at the moment, right now in New Zealand and Australia, we've got the Women's Football World Cup going on, and it is very interesting to watch a tournament where sort of every pool game really, really matters, and ideally that's what you want to get to with the Rugby World Cup. So I think that's helping fuel the excitement as well, because the All Blacks are going to go off to a tournament which people expect them to win. So yeah, to answer your question, excitement is building.
Yeah, that's good to see. And it's well, we speak about a day after Ireland were officially eliminated from the Women's World Cup, so hopefully the men go a step further at the very least. But as I alluded to, and as you alluded to, they kind of come in an unfamiliar setting, to say the least, and fans the world over, like they're almost an enigma, which New Zealand never are, because they've had up and down form. We have the lame duck coach and Ian Foster with Razor coming in, Scott Robertson, but yet they're still New Zealand. They still put, what was it, 35 points on South Africa there 2 weeks ago. Like, they're a force to be reckoned with. So Jamie, would you go along with the sense that with the sense of the unknown, or do you think they're just ready? New Zealand are ready to attack now?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you can make a case for both, really, because I think that the results of the past few years have made us wary as All Black fans, that nothing's guaranteed. It doesn't feel like anything's guaranteed anymore. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later. But the Irish series last year was really devastating, I think, for a lot of fans, because it's one thing to lose to Ireland and Dublin. It's another thing to lose in Chicago, but to lose in New Zealand really showed just how much of a shift there's been in the last few years. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But it feels like now, after a long season last year, and a big long layoff and a lot of players getting rested throughout Super Rugby, which people aren't that happy about, but is probably for the greater good, that the All Blacks and that Ian Foster has managed to put together a pretty comprehensive plan, because those first two tests that they've had this year have been really impressive, like probably the most impressive of this era, given the amount of pressure that was on. Like, there were a lot of people in New Zealand that just presumed that we would lose to Argentina in Argentina, which is insane. when you think about the All Blacks history and everything. And so for them to come out and just smack the Pumas over the head and take that game within the first like 10 minutes, and then a week later do the same thing to South Africa, it's a very, very positive step. So I think I'd be more inclined to agree with that they're primed to attack, because I think once the psychological value of the All Blacks just kind of being really ominous and being in good form is going to make a lot of other teams worried, really worried, and perhaps adjust their game plans accordingly. And when you start as a team worrying more about your opposition than yourselves, then you're in trouble. And I think that's what's tripped up a lot of teams against the All Blacks just forever. And so I think that if they can go out tomorrow, give the Wallabies a hiding, take back the Bledisloe Cup and go into the World Cup unbeaten, I think the mood would definitely be shifting more to a positive one by the time the tournament kicks off. But in saying that, that game against France, we're really going to know, like, after the first game of the World Cup.
Yeah, that's where it's going to go, because it does feel like even for France, all roads lead to that opening game. First of all, like, we've got, like, I watched the South Africa game in Auckland, and I was blown away. Like, everything from New Zealand, it was from the side that drew with England last year, that lost twice to Ireland. They just looked like a much more rounded team. And like, I've done a French preview, which is already up on the channel, and they're saying, I wouldn't be surprised if the loser of that game goes on to win the World Cup, similar to 2019 when yourselves in South Africa played an opening game. And it does have that vibe where it's like, it's big, but these sides, like New Zealand, are number 4 in the world. They could go to number 3 at the weekend, depending on how they get on against Australia. And like, you just can't write them off either. Like, they are kind of prime. But I suppose to look in New Zealand, we have to look back as well. Yes, they have the history of 3 World Cups, but like, it's gone under the radar. They've won 3 rugby championships in a row. If they go and they beat Australia in the MCG, it's 4 in a row in a World Cup cycle, which is it's phenomenal. Yet all that anyone is talking about is that Test series lost to Ireland, which is probably unfair, I think you could say. But like, you said we'd bring it up, and how much of an impact do you think that had on not just the squad but the wider public? And then it brought forward the coaching changes. Joe Schmidt was set to come in anyway, and now maybe it's just up here, but we're all talking about his impact. And do you feel like it might have just been a case that the better of 2 good teams came out on top that day, or was it, I suppose, that kind of fright that you could say for New Zealand?
Oh, well, I definitely think the better team won. I'm not going to sit here and make any excuses for that. I think that the Irish in that series, and I mean, I'm not, you know this as well as anyone, that they developed as a touring team. And the first test they learnt, and then they put what they'd learnt into practice in the second test, came away with a very good win. I mean, admittedly there was a red card in that game that swung things. But then again, there's no arguments whatsoever about that third test. Like, the Irish won that one running away, in my opinion. And the fact that was happening on New Zealand soil, these are in front of people that up until not that long ago had never seen the All Blacks lose to Ireland at all. And then they've paid money to watch it happen in front of them. That really was, like you said, the kind of, I wouldn't say it was the final nail in the coffin, but it was definitely one of the first ones on this coaching, on Ian Foster's coaching regime. You have to remember, though, that after that came another loss to Argentina, which was again very unbelievable and unacceptable. But after that, you had another half of the season where the All Blacks actually played really well and won their next 6 games. And things were actually looking all right. And you can go, okay, well, they've gone away on this end of year tour where they played against like a real banana skin game against Japan, in which they had to field, it was like a C team that they fielded. They had to go to Wales. I mean, Wales weren't up to much, but they got the job done against them. They had to play against a very good Scotland side at home who really believed that they could win that game. Like if you're a Scottish fan, it was, to me, like that was your chance to do that. And they were down, and the bench had to come on and save the game for them and did a really good job of it. And so by that stage, it was like, actually, the signs are all pointing upward. This is looking really good for the All Blacks, where this tour is answering a lot of questions. And then they go to Twickenham. They're up 25 points to 6 against, at a place that has historically been difficult place for the All Blacks to go and play. And if they just hung on for that last 10 minutes and ground out like a good win, like not a pretty win, but a good one, none of this coaching stuff would have happened at the start of the season, because you can go, we're just going to take your most recent body of work, which was actually really good, like an unbeaten end-of-year tour, a win at Twickenham, a win at Murrayfield. It's looking good. And I think that's what's meant that there's been all this disruption at the start of the year with the coaching change that's happened, which is unprecedented. That's never happened before, where they've named a coach while another coach has been in place. But at the same time, I think that the best possible outcome of that drama has actually happened, which is that Ian Foster's said, well, like, my job is just to win every possible game that there is and do it in the most impressive possible way. So I'm going to pick the best team for every game, which is what he's done so far. And he's picked another team to do that against the Wallabies on Saturday. And I think because he knows the future, he knows that whatever happens in France, he's done. That's given him a bit of, ironically, like a bit more of a free rein to do. And so yeah, I think that going back to your original point, it all kind of started with that Irish series where we're at now, and it could have gone really bad, and thankfully it hasn't. It's sort of coming out the other side now. But we're going to know after this Bledisloe Cup series, I think, where the All Blacks are really at.
And like, it's hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's easy to look back, and a lot of people's perception is that was the end of Ian Foster's reign. But the reality was Wales went into that game thinking they could take New Zealand, lost by 20 or 30 points. Scotland went into that game thinking they could take down New Zealand, lost pretty narrow fashion, to be fair to them. And England were probably the most defeatist going into it, because, the scariest time to play New Zealand is when they have a run of games on you, and they had. And yes, it was a bit of a weird game, as you alluded to. So it's the question marks are probably still there. And like, I meant to put in the notes and I haven't, but just that coaching ticket that's coming in with Scott Robertson, with a former Munster man and Jason Holland, Liam McDonald. Is there, I know Robertson has this persona that's very well liked and he has the credentials to match, but like, when you got some very successful Super Rugby head coaches, never mind just assistant coaches, but head coaches, would the general fan base in New Zealand be pretty optimistic seeing them come in? And again, not just Robertson, but even just the ticket that he's assembled alongside him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been people who have been screaming out for Robertson to be head coach since the end of the last World Cup. He's a very popular figure down here, and and that's from a guy from the Crusaders, which is a team that everyone hates. So for him to have the amount of groundswell of support that he does, it really says a lot about how people regard him. I mean, you can't argue with his body of work. He's won Super Rugby every time he's coached a team in it, which is incredible, really. And he has a very good way with the media. Everyone seems to get along, enjoy the way that he carries himself. The media, he's a little bit offbeat, which is different for a rugby coach in New Zealand. As far as the ticket, as you called it, he's assembled, like, it's it's not. I don't think people are really looking at that. It's just about the coach. Like everything falls on the head guy, which is why I think there's been a bit of antipathy towards Foster, because the whole the rationale behind him, at least what we got told, the rationale behind him getting the job in the first place was the team that he had assembled around him, who he ended up firing a couple of years later, and Brad Moore and John Plumtree, who just weren't up to the job. I feel like Jason Holland's done pretty well to get to where he is. I know obviously he's got that connection in Ireland, but as a Hurricanes coach, I kind of expected more given how much talent that team has. He's also just a little bit. He's ironically kind of a little bit unfamiliar to us because he's done all his coaching overseas, and so when he was named as Hurricanes coach, a lot of people didn't even really know who he was. And Leon McDonald, obviously, we are very familiar with. Him and Robertson used to be teammates at the Crusaders and in the All Blacks back in the day, and he has, I wouldn't say he's turned the Blues around in his tenure with them, because with the amount of players and resources and support that team can tap into, they really should have won something by now. So I guess that kind of says a lot about Robertson as well, that he's managed to consistently keep beating the Blues every time they play. But in saying that, up until this year, the Blues have, under McDonald's coaching, have for the last 4 years been the next best New Zealand team. So, can't really argue with that. But yeah, I think people are more interested. People are more fired up about just change itself. It feels kind of like there's been an election, and we've got a new prime minister, like a new regime is coming in that is very different to the old one. That's the way it feels, and I'm going to be very interested to see how it goes, and I think a lot of other people are as well.
Yeah, and listen, it's like Robertson's credentials again, as we say, are, you can't argue with it really. He's a top coach, and I suppose next year is when the question marks will be. But listen, there's been a lot of question marks over New Zealand over the last 2 years, but so we'll move on from those. And like at the time of recording, as we've said a few times now, like they've only played their 2 rugby championship games, but what do you think we've learned from them in those 2 games, and the 2 convincing victories over Argentina and South Africa?
I think we've learned that mainly that there were a few areas on the field that people were worried about, which I don't think we really need to be worried about anymore, and that is at lock. The amount of depth that was there seemed quite shallow, but now it turns out that Scott Barrett is having the best season of his career, and he's actually probably close to pushing Sam Whitelock out of the starting team and potentially out of the squad. So the competition around that area is really good, because there was some worries about just how old Sam Whitelock and Brodie Retallick are, and also Retallick's just a little bit injury prone, and it didn't really feel like there was anyone below them, because it was kind of thought that Scott Barrett would end up at blindside. And also the loose forward trio seems a lot more solid now, and also the midfield as well. The most pleasing aspect of those wins, though, is how quickly the All Blacks have started games, because that was what was costing them in their losses last year. You can see that, I think it was in their first, all their games in the Rugby Championship and the Irish Series, they conceded the first points, and it was starting to become a recurring theme. That like, why are you not waking up until 15 minutes into the game? And they've completely flipped that on its head. Yes, Argentina was one thing, because, like, that team had to come in from all around the world. and they had to, they would have had like sort of limited preparation. But the Springbok game really said a lot because that was a team that was coming off a good win, and they'd named a very good team, and they'd had their plan all sorted out with their big bench and everything, and the All Blacks completely nullified the whole thing. And I mean, it kind of said a lot about the Springboks as well, about like their theory about bringing bench players on to kind of win them the game. It's like, nah, you need those guys to close the game out for you, not win it, because the All Blacks managed to keep them at arm's reach like for that whole second half. So I think that that was a really pleasing aspect, that they dealt with a couple of really different teams and still got the same kind of result. And it was like what I said before, that once you start worrying too much about the opposition, you're in trouble. The All Blacks just kind of stuck to what they did, which is grab the ball, hang on to it, kick really well when you have to, and just force the other team onto the back foot. And that was what the most impressive thing about it was. And then also just just sort of like what I talked about before, the public has sort of turned around and been like, actually, yeah, you know what? Maybe we are the real deal. Maybe they're going to go to France and actually pull this off. And then it's going to be really funny because we've just spent the last 3 years calling for the coach to get sacked. And then when he, and then if he turns around and wins the World Cup, like, how do we react to that,
Yeah, no, it's true. And it is a funny one because you just can't write them off. Like, you look at the talent that's in the squad, and I just want to touch on the back line really quickly because I didn't see the Argentina game myself, but from the South Africa game, I felt like it was the first time we really seen Mwanga and Barrett click together. Bowden Barrett, that is, and then Jordy Barrett was at 12. And what it seemed like for me, and like, I don't watch a whole lot of Super Rugby, but I felt like their kicking game was very good. Their distribution game, they worked in tandem very, very well, and it looked like probably for the first time in even more than 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, that they have got their best players on the pitch. Mwanga is a fine player. Barrett is one of the best test level 10s in the last 10 years. They finally got all these players in the pitch and it finally worked. Is that something to maybe not build on is the right word, because it's working, but is that something that would add a bit of confidence? Because I know the Mwanga question was kind of, you get a lot of to and fro for the last couple of years.
Yeah, you've nailed it, like right there. I think that combination has been under a lot of scrutiny, and it's not a recent thing as well. This goes all the way back to like 2019, because you've got these two really good players, I mean, like generational players, talent you've got, and the feeling has always been that you can't leave one of them out because they're both that good. So you got to find a place on the field, and so first five and fullback, or fly half and fullback, is the most natural way to do it. But the prevailing thought over the years is that they're actually too good to be on the field together, because it felt like they were overcalling each other. They were kind of getting in each other's way. But whatever they've done over the off season, and then, the build up to these test matches, really worked, because that game against Springboks was easily the best performance by those two put together we've seen yet. And I think that if there's anything that should worry other teams, it's that the All Blacks have managed to sort that out, because it was something that should have been a strength that ended up being a bit of a weakness for them. Because I was always of the thought that it was like, you just get rid of one of them. It's harsh, but you just have to say to one, like, we're building the team around the other guy. Go talk to your agent. Yeah. Go to Japan, whatever. You can come back after the next one, but just be a bit ruthless about it. But they've actually managed to find a way, and especially after Bowden's Super Rugby season, because he wasn't that impressive for the Blues. Mm-hmm. So there was a bit of chat that he probably wouldn't even be, like, he was always going to make the All Blacks, but he might not even be in the sort of top match day squad. Also, there's the fact that Damien McKenzie's still a part of the squad as well. So he will be and he started against the Pumas in that first game, played really, really well. So now you've got these options there, because I feel like Mackenzie will probably come back into the team in the 23 jersey for the World Cup. And by doing that, you've actually, I'm not sure whether they were trying to do this, but the team is now stacked with goal kickers because you've got Geordie Barrett there as well, who's the long range option. Mackenzie's obviously a great kicker. Mo'unga's fantastic, and Barrett, he's had his off nights, but he's still scored like 700 points in Test rugby or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a really good byproduct of their selection, their selections here. And it was really interesting to see South Africa show up without a goal kicker at all. Not a recognised one, which is really odd for them considering what their game plan is. So, from a World Cup perspective, it's great to see that they've covered that really well.
And it's funny you highlighted the difference, because that's actually what cost South Africa against Ireland last year. They're kicking, I think they had something like 3 from 6 or something in place kicks against Ireland, and they lost by a score. For New Zealand, that's not an issue. But just we'll touch on the wider squad in a minute. Like there's more players than out halves, contrary to what we all like to believe. But Mackenzie then, like, a very good player, a test-proven international fullback. Probably didn't have the best Super Rugby final at out half, but played very well against the Pumas in his next game at out half for New Zealand this time. Is he probably on the outside looking in, or is he still like, okay, as a 23, he's a very good option?
Yeah, I'm not. Well, this is the only puzzling thing about what the team that the All Blacks have picked for this weekend, is that I would have thought he would be back in at 23, because that was sort of logically where he'd go, because I think Mo'unga's last performance has not cemented him at the top spot, but definitely sort of put him ahead as the All Blacks' first choice out half. Sorry, I was trying to remember what you guys call it. There's so many bloody different names for this.
I know.
Yeah, anyway, right? Yes. I still think he's going to be a solid part of the top test lineup. But the only thing about him is that and you did kind of mention it, alluding to the Super Rugby final, as soon as he's not getting the front football and he's not getting his own way, things he can kind of melt a little bit. Because there was at least one game where the Chiefs in Super Rugby, when the Chiefs got upset by the Queensland Reds, where he was completely ineffective, because the Chiefs had rested a lot of their forwards, and the Reds really took it to them in a game. And I think that it's stuff like that where he kind of needs to prove himself in more adverse conditions, that he'd be seen as like the sort of guy you'd want to be starting at 10 in a knockout World Cup game, for example. But if that did happen, if there was a couple injuries, and if he's playing 10 in a crucial game, I don't think the All Blacks are losing much, really, given that he's such a good goal kicker as well, and the running threat that he provides, and also if Beauden Barrett was on the field with him, they can almost just swap positions, because Mackenzie's played a lot at fullback at Super Rugby level as well. So and started tests there. So it's a good problem for the All Blacks to have those three guys there, because any of the three starting a test match, I don't think the All Blacks are losing much.
Great position to be in, really, isn't it? Like it's. And then just moving on to the wider squad, as we said we would, let there be, as always, there's this pilgrimage away from Super Rugby after every World Cup to Europe or Japan. But for now, the squad that Ian Foster has picked, I suppose, firstly, how do you think it matches up with previous World Cup squads? I think big names is probably a bit lighter, possibly. Maybe that's just because we don't see as much Super Rugby up the north anymore. But is there anyone to watch out for, maybe guys who will feel like they're unfairly omitted, maybe?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the one thing about the naming of the squad is that there wasn't really anyone that got left out other than Sean Stevenson, who was the form fullback for the Chiefs, who is actually part of the kind of wider All Black group. He's been with the team since they started training, and he's kind of there as an injury cover. Like that was the big omission that shocked everyone. How much game time he would have got had he been picked, though, that's the interesting one. He might have started in that game against Argentina, but given those three guys that I just talked about, he probably wasn't going to get a run at fullback. He would have had to been on the wing, and then you've got to make space for him by taking out like Will Jordan, and you can't take out Will Jordan if he's fit because he's good for a try and a half every Test match. So I was a lot of people were really critical of Foster for making that omission, but logically, given what he's trying to do with the 10-15 axis, I can see what he's trying to do. I personally would have Stevenson in there. I just like if the guy's scoring as many tries going into a Test rugby season, you pick them. You pick the winger who's getting across the line the best. That's just the way the All Blacks have always worked. And Caleb Clark hasn't really been doing that. And so that's the one big area of contention. Since the All Blacks started playing and winning, though, people have kind of forgotten about it a little bit. And Stevenson is like this close to being in anyway. It's just going to take like one injury, and I feel like he could force his way in. And then the other thing is that like the All Blacks draw for the World Cup is they have these pool games against bloody Luxembourg and Madagascar and whoever, but like that, those were the games that these guys would have been playing. The only other critique of the wider squad I'd have is that they've kind of run out of time to use some of the new guys who are again picked off Super Rugby form to really give them Test experience. Cam Roigard, who's the halfback from the Hurricanes, who is very, very highly rated. He's a big halfback. He's about 6 feet tall. Who I feel like they were going to use mostly as a bench player to come on and defend and kick the All Blacks to victory. You know, much the same way that TJ Perenara was the role that he was filled. He's been named on the bench for tomorrow night. Like I hope they give him some decent minutes and that he can force his way into the World Cup squad because he was just so good during Super Rugby. And another guy that like I'm guessing is going to have a run next week, but I would have liked to have seen him play more as Samapeni Finau, who's a blindside flanker from the Chiefs, who was again like a guy not a lot of people were talking about at the start of the season, and by the end of it, it was like this guy could potentially start, you know, right now for the All Blacks. So it's just kind of a shame to see a few guys in there that you're like, you should be striking while the iron's hot. If these guys are coming out of Super Rugby in really good form, put them in the first test, like pick on form and just see what happens from there, because you know it's the Rugby Championship. Like, yes, it's nice to win it, but it in a World Cup year it doesn't really matter. And if you look at previous World Cup years, the All Blacks actually haven't won the Rugby Championship in its present form in any World Cup year yet in the 4-team format. I think you have to go back to 2003 or it's either 3 or 7 when the All Blacks actually won the Tri-Nations leading up to the World Cup. And New Zealanders don't care if you don't win the Rugby Championship, but you go and win the World Cup. As long as you're winning that in the Bledisloe Cup, people are happy.
That's, I suppose you can't really blame them because they've won enough rugby championships at this stage. But yeah, beating Australia and win the Bledisloe it's a different kettle of fish altogether. But just we touch a lot on the backs, and I suppose the forwards is probably another one. Like this front row, probably light on experience, but high on form as well. De Groot and Lomax getting a lot of plaudits, and looked very impressive in recent games as well. And then, you know, Shannon Frizzell has pushed on Scott Barrett, as you mentioned, and then I mean, Ardy Surveyor doesn't need any introduction. He's getting better with age. Like a bit of the critique about New Zealand recently was, do they have the power to match with big teams? But I think they probably just have a pack that is good enough, which when power isn't enough, sometimes it's just about being as good as the opposite man sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good that you picked up on the front row because that was a real area of concern last year. And to be honest, a lot of De Groot and Lomax's elevation and good form was more by accident than design. De Groot was actually dropped at the start of last year after debuting in late 2021. And he only got back in the team because of an injury to Ofa Tuangafasi. And from there, he's never really let go of that jersey. So, and Lomax has just been really, really consistent. And it's great to see because he debuted a long time ago and sort of fell out of the picture for a while, and now he's come back. And so this is the third test in a row that those guys are starting, which is surprising, really, because I thought that they would have rotated them. And then at hooker, you've got really, really promising Samisoni Taukeiaho. Actually, he's more than promising. He's proven himself at test level. He's fitted right in. And he's scoring open field tries, line out drive tries. His line out throwing's great, and he's just a really big physical threat across the field. So really happy with the way the front row is going. Already talked about the second row, but yeah, Frizzell's form. Like I'm just still got a bit of a question mark over him because he's always had this reputation as being like a flat track bully, but he really stood up in that game against the Springboks, against some very big, Springbok players. Whether he can just keep that form going, because I've never really seen a really consistent body of work from him. He plays for the Highlanders, and so they're, the worst New Zealand team in Super Rugby, and so they're always destined to sort of lose every second or third game. So not a lot's expected of him at that level, and as long as he can just bust out like a good performance every now and then. So what we need to see from Frizzell is like another great performance tomorrow night, and then we can start to believe in him. And then the byproduct of that I mentioned earlier was the shifting Barrett back into lock. There has been a little bit of talk about Artie. Just there's always kind of been a question mark over his size at number 8 and whether he's got the bulk to be able to make those carries off the back of the scrum. Obviously, he's just dynamite around the field and everything, but to do when a test gets really close and tight, he needs to be able to play the more traditional role of a number 8 of being more of a defensive player and being able to just take the ball over the game line with some good hard carries. I personally think he can do it, but that's kind of what the chat is, especially when there's a guy like Luke Jacobson there who literally is a very big guy who can take those carries that we talked about, and Dalton Papali'i as well, who's getting a start tomorrow night because Sam Cane's out just with a neck complaint. So I think that if there's one area that just still kind of needs, I know I mentioned earlier that it's feeling a lot more locked in, but like there still could be a few tweaks at loose forward, just because this time last year it felt like it was just all over the show, to be honest. But it's feeling a lot better than where it was.
Yeah, that's as I said in the French podcast, and I'll probably say it in a few podcasts, but a New Zealand side that's improving and brimming with confidence is a very scary prospect. It's scary enough for France, who they play in the opening game, and like we can't mention Pool A without mentioning Pool B and the treacherous draw that is the top four sides in the world as we speak, destined to face off in the World Cup quarterfinals. Now, some people may think it's okay, it's much ado and nothing. Other people say it's a bit imbalanced. What's your thoughts on it? We'll move on to Pool A itself afterwards, but what's your thoughts on the draw and the likelihood of playing Ireland or South Africa in the quarters, or Scotland?
I mean, obviously it's given us something to talk about for the last few years, but like, didn't we play Ireland in the last World Cup? It's not really anything new. And that was an Irish team that had beaten the All Blacks last time that played them. Yeah,
Yep.
no, they did.
Yep, they had.
And we had a year's worth of chat about how Ireland were the best team, and fair enough too. You know, they'd beaten the All Blacks. Like, I think things got kind of tipped on their head a bit in the 2019 Six Nations, if I remember correctly. But you know, it was all this chat about how Ireland had the All Blacks number now, they weren't afraid of them, and everything like that. And then they met in the quarterfinal, and the All Blacks smoked them. And I think a lot of that result probably says more about Ireland than it does about the All Blacks. But if I was the coaching staff or anyone who had any connection to that, you can just say, like, look, we've done this before. If they do indeed play Ireland, but I think what New Zealanders are kind of having a hard time getting their head around is that it's a World Cup. A lot of what goes on is actually out of your hands. You know, people saying we're going to play Ireland or South Africa in a quarterfinal, like, it might be Scotland. You know, like I could totally see Scotland pulling off an upset or two, and all three of those teams being kind of level on points or something. And I think you just got to look at the way the Springboks won the last World Cup. Things just fell into place for them, you know. And if for some reason the All Blacks, you know, they win against France, they play against Scotland in a quarterfinal, all of a sudden everything's looking, you know, you're on course to play, I think, the Wallabies in a semi-final. All of a sudden
Right,
it's looking a hell of a lot more promising, isn't it? And then
yeah.
you've got a final against, well, who knows, England maybe. That's looking a lot more promising for the All Blacks. So I think once the tournament rolls around, you can people start to get their heads around the permutations and go, you don't actually need to be the best side of the last 4 years to win this World Cup. You just need a few other teams to mess up, which is exactly what happened in the last one, in order to give yourself the best chance of winning. And that's because that's how the Springboks won the World Cup. I'm sorry to any South Africans that are listening, but that's how you won it.
Yeah.
We
Well,
did you the biggest. We did the Springboks the biggest favor by beating them in the first game.
possibly. Well, I actually made a similar point on yesterday's podcast as well about, you know, sometimes it is literally that old sports phrase, better to be lucky than to be good. And like, there's a stat that was brought to my attention. Any team who's beaten New Zealand or Ireland in a World Cup knockout game has lost the next one. It literally happened last time around as well. You know, New Zealand beat Ireland, they go on lose to England lose South Africa. Do you know, like this? It's tough. Maybe we're the curse. Maybe we're the team that everyone should fear, not France, not South Africa, because, you know, no one can ever get past us. But then, like you said, Pool A, it's not Luxembourg and Madagascar. It is Namibia and Uruguay in that pool.
Yeah,
New
sorry to any
Zealand.
Namibians or Uruguayans listening. Sorry about that.
I don't think there will be any, to be honest. But like, New Zealand won't fear them. Like, these are the games that typically, like we've seen in 2015, New Zealand put up a huge score against Namibia. Like, that's what these games usually are. But that French game opening night in Stade de France, like, there has to be some sense of dread in some regard, surely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just given what happened last time the All Blacks were there, where they got whipped, and this is obviously a very different French outfit to the one that we've grown up watching, where they're brilliant one week and rubbish the next. Like, they're just brilliant all the time now, and we've just watched their under-20s team just trample over everybody like they did last year. And so it feels like they're going to be like this going forward from now on. You know, their club system, the way that they've managed to get their club system, their academy system is just, it's taken them a while, but it's all pointing in the right direction now. You know, like, it's scary what they're capable of, because they've got so much money and so many resources and the ability to tap into so many players as well. Because for us as New Zealanders, we think, okay, when a Pacific Island player wants to further their rugby career, they come to New Zealand. People don't realize that France owns half of Polynesia, and it's not like, you know, they're moving countries. That's literally part of France. And so you can see that Pacific influence in that French team now, with guys like Piero Malvaca, Vahamahina, and guys that France doesn't even have to entice to come and play in the competition. And then the guys they have enticed from Fijian backgrounds and things. So they've got a really good system going over there. And I think that it's not just this first game that we're worried about. It's just like how going forward, the way that they're doing things over there is not something that New Zealand rugby can really compete with, because we just don't have the money to do it. And so, it's not just going to be a battle on the field. It's kind of one off it as well, like where the All Blacks really need to be able to prove that our way of doing things is still sustainable and viable. Like it's a big topic, I know, to talk about, but it really does feel that way down here.
It's to be fair, it's a big topic in world rugby in general. Wales, England, Ireland, and France have been very lucky. They've built a model that works for them. But like England rugby, they're losing Premiership clubs. Welsh rugby, the WRU are running them into the ground. New Zealand, it's a cash issue. Australia, it's a lack of interest and supporters through the gates like this. And maybe New Zealand, like, and we kind of discussed this before on a different pod, but like if France win, it's a romantic win. If Australia win, it would be great for the game with the Lions tour coming up. If Ireland win, very few people would generally begrudge Ireland for winning. If South Africa win, they make history. First time they go back. Like there's so many different storylines, but that opening game, even of itself, is one of those storylines. Like, we almost had a dress rehearsal for it back in 2021 in Stade de France, and like France won that game, but it was one of the games of the year, one of the games of the decade. Will New Zealand, I suppose New Zealand probably never fear anyone, but will that be lingering on their minds, you think, or will it just be a case of, listen, all the pressure is on France?
Well, I hope so. I hope the one this has kind of happened before, and it was a while ago, so I don't expect you to remember because you probably weren't even born yet. But in 1995,
wasn't born.
obviously everybody remembers or knows about Jonah Lomu just running over everybody, and the All Blacks being this absolutely unstoppable force that got tripped up in the final. And it's probably like the most famous World Cup of all time just because of that. People forget though that the All Blacks actually came in off a really bad season the year before. They'd lost a test series to France at home, which was the last time that they'd lost a series until last year, and had lost the Bledisloe Cup as well. This was obviously amateur era, so there's a lot less tests played. But the feeling going into that World Cup, because it was played much earlier in the year, it was played around May. I think it finished, it was May, and the final was in June sometime. So our southern hemisphere, like the start of our winter. So the All Blacks only had one game going into it where they thrashed Canada. So the feeling of that one felt a lot like what this one does. And so if they can tap back into the kind of dark horse mentality of just sort of slipping in and being like, we're the ones who are going to spoil the party here. We're the ones who are going to grab everyone's attention from the first game onwards. Then I think that's the best way that the All Blacks can go about winning this World Cup, because you're right, there's going to be a ton of pressure on France, but I think I've seen enough out of them to know that they're going to be able to handle it pretty well, and it's going to take something pretty special to knock them off at that park. And I just can't wait to watch it, because it's going to be the most interesting World Cup opening game ever, in my opinion.
Well, it certainly goes ahead of New Zealand Tonga 2011 or England Fiji 2015. So it's not a guaranteed win for France or for New Zealand, that's for sure. But we'll wrap on predictions. Do you see the All Blacks doing it, or if not, which way do you see the Webb Ellis Cup going?
I hate making predictions, but I don't think the All Blacks are going to win the World Cup. I just think they've left their run kind of too late. I've said a whole lot of good things about the team in the last, however long we've been talking and everything, but at the same time, I think I've seen more out of a lot of the other teams. I would probably back Ireland to win it. I don't know how they're going to get there to do it, but I think this is their time because I was just so impressed by what I saw from them last year and their ability to adapt on the fly, which is something that the All Blacks have always been better at than everyone else. In saying that, I could totally see like England falling arse first into the final, and just because of the draw, even the Wallabies maybe. But I hope not. I hope that the two best teams in the tournament can somehow, who are playing their way through the tournament, can somehow make it to the final. But yeah, I think that you've got the first game against France and then a quarterfinal for the All Blacks. And if the All Blacks win that quarterfinal, they're going to win. They'll win the World Cup. But unfortunately, I don't think they will.
And I feel like a lot of people are going to end up saying it's between France and Ireland. And I do see New Zealand upsetting the apple cart, like 2019 lost. They won that opening game. They got to the semi-final. Eddie Jones and England out-taught them, but you never know. They could lose the opening game this time and go all the way to the final. It's now a live possibility. So thank you very much for that, Jamie. It's been a pleasure to catch up and to talk, and for joining me tonight, or morning time, your time. So I'll be back again on Thursday with the third preview pod as we round off Pool A with the preview of Italy. I'll be joined by the trio of the Fratelli, the rugby podcast for that one. And we'll close out the week with a recap of Ireland's warm-up clash with the Azzurri on Sunday night. So thanks at home to everyone for listening. If you like what you see or hear, please do subscribe. You can find the links for my channels below, as well as the link for Jamie's Twitter page, which I would definitely suggest for news and opinions on the All Blacks. But for now, take it easy.